Inequality is a topic that has divided economists since the study of economics began, and probably even long before. One of the key questions that economists try to answer is to whom should the fundamentally limited resources in an economy be provided? There are no correct answers, but there are some that are obviously wrong. I think most of you will agree that the wealth of an economy should not be hoarded by authoritarian rulers who are unaccountable to their people. On the opposite end, the accumulation of resources is one of the main motivations for people to work harder and use capital efficiently. These actions by economic participants add value to the economic system, but they are also difficult, risky, time-consuming, and not fun. If they are not rewarded with a higher proportion of resources, it would mean that they are not carried out, leading to an economic system that worsens globally for everyone. We have discussed on this channel some of the most unequal countries in the world and the economic problems caused by inequality. If the majority of people in an economy are too poor to have access to adequate education, nutrition, and healthcare, besides being terrible social problems, it is also bad for the economy overall, even for those who own the majority of wealth. This is because economically disadvantaged individuals with low education, health issues, or malnutrition constitute a very poor workforce. If workers cannot perform at their best, there will be less wealth overall, meaning that even if the top 1% of the 1% owns a large part of the economy, they could be affected. Distributing that wealth more equitably could potentially result in a better economic system for everyone. So, even if they don't care about the poverty in their country, there is still an argument that a certain level of inequality is in their best interest. Instead of learning from the mistakes of economies that have erred in this balance, it might be wiser to look at the most egalitarian country to find out what they are doing. So, how do economists determine which country is the most equal in the world? What tools do these countries use to manage that equality? And lastly, is there any economic drawback caused by this equality? Economists measure inequality in many ways. The most popular is the so-called Gini coefficient. This works by plotting something called the Lorenz curve, named after economist Max O. Lorenz, and it is obtained by dividing the economy into percentiles and graphically representing the cumulative proportion of resources each percentile possesses. Looking at income inequality, the bottom 1% of the lowest earning workers might earn only a tenth of the total national income. The next 1% would represent 0.2%, summing up to 0.3%, and so on, until the top 1% of the highest earners could represent 10% of the total national income. If we draw a line through each of these percentiles, we get the Lorenz curve for that economy. Imagine an equitable economy where the bottom 1% earns 1% of income. The next 2% also earns 1%, and the top 1%, if we can call them that, only earns 1% of the income. If we follow the cumulative total of these data points, we form a 45-degree line. No economy will match this because there will always be some level of income inequality. However, if we plot the Lorenz curve of a real economy over this perfect hypothesis, the graph will have two areas, the area above the Lorenz curve and the area below. The Gini coefficient is calculated simply by looking at the percentage of the area that is above the Lorenz curve. So in this economy, let's say about 40% is above the line and 60% below. This would give the economy a Gini coefficient of 0.4, which is great by world standards. For example, Iceland has a Gini coefficient of income inequality of 0.369. Video done, well done, Republic of Iceland. However, of course, it's not that simple. There are many interesting economic aspects behind what makes Iceland so egalitarian. Firstly, they don't have as many people. With 370,000 inhabitants, they have fewer people than most medium-sized cities. A small population by itself doesn't mean there can't be inequality. Any population of 2 or more inhabitants will have a level of inequality if we graph it on a Lorenz curve. However, Iceland's low population helps them in other ways. Iceland is rich in geothermal energy, meaning electricity is very cheap, making energy-intensive industries like aluminum smelting or cryptocurrency mining highly competitive. The country has a very strong financial services sector, which is partly the reason they got into so much trouble with the financial crisis. It is also a significant center for commercial fishing. And I know fishing doesn't sound as glamorous or profitable, but Icelandic fishing is done with huge boats employing state-of-the-art equipment, raking in billions of dollars each year. Additionally, the country is beautiful, And that's why, outside of the pandemic, more tourists visit the country every year than there are citizens. If we recall our factors of production, land, labor, and capital, Iceland has very productive land, a good amount of capital, but a small labor pool. This means that the workers they have are very valuable, and even average workers can demand high wages because employers don't have many choices. If we combine this with an egalitarian culture and political system, it makes sense that Iceland tops the list of countries with the highest income equality. But remember when I said it's not that simple? Well, it's not. Iceland's Gini coefficient of 0.369 is measured before taxes and transfers, meaning it only measures people's incomes before taxes and excludes any money they might have received through government assistance programs. These are two of the three main ways the government can control income inequality. We'll get to the third, but for now let's see if you can guess it. Usually, taxes reduce the net incomes of higher earners, and public assistance increases the incomes of lower earners. Therefore, high taxes and generous public assistance will make the economy more equal. Almost all types of taxes and public assistance usually improve income inequality, with the exception of public assistance programs that specifically help businesses. Still, the Gini coefficient of all countries in the OECD monitors improved when including taxes and transfers. Some improved significantly, like Slovakia, which has a Gini coefficient of 0.22 after taxes and transfers, making it the most equal country in the world. Slovakia's Gini coefficient before these interventions is still good, just behind Iceland with 0.383, meaning it was very similar before taxes and social assistance, and even more so after them. But Slovenia, the second place after fiscal equality, is a bit more interesting. Before taxes, Slovenia had a Gini coefficient of 0.44, which is not bad by world standards, leaving a big gap to its post-tax and welfare Gini coefficient of 0.246. This indicates that Slovenia has very high taxes, especially for individuals. Income taxes reach a maximum of 50%, which is high but not outrageous. There are countries like Finland that have a maximum marginal tax rate of 57%, but the difference is that Finns have to earn much more before they start paying it. In Slovenia, people start paying 50% of their income for everything above 72,000 euros, which is a very low maximum marginal tax. With that, they fund generous welfare and retirement plans, and that's why the country has such low income inequality, which is great, but it can cause problems. Economist Arthur Laffer devised another curve to consider when it comes to national income equality, the Laffer curve. It shows the theoretical relationship between total government revenues and the effective tax rate of a country. According to this relationship, government revenues at a zero effective tax rate will be zero and will increase as the government raises the rate. This is straightforward so far, but Laffer adds that beyond a certain tax rate, any additional increase will make the government generate less tax revenue. The reason this happens is that if taxes rise enough, people have less incentive to work and a greater incentive to find ways to evade taxes, either through legal loopholes or illegal evasion. People with high incomes and highly marketable skills will also start moving to other countries with lower tax rates, where they can enjoy a better quality of life. This not only translates into a direct loss of income on their part, as they will no longer pay taxes to the government, but it also harms the economy in other ways by withdrawing highly skilled workers from the active population, as they are more likely to move to ensure higher incomes with lower taxes elsewhere. The shape of the Laffer curve is highly debated, and almost all countries fall to the left of it. But that doesn't mean countries can solve the problem of inequality through this kind of intervention without causing other economic problems. Income taxes and social benefits also do not influence the measure of inequality that could be considered more important: wealth inequality. Wealth inequality is the difference between the net worth of the richest and the poorest. We can keep slicing this into a Lorenz curve and create Gini coefficients, but wealth inequality is almost always higher because people with higher incomes will have more money left after covering essentials to make investments. These investments will start generating their own returns, meaning wealth can accumulate more than income. As a reference, Iceland has a Gini coefficient of wealth inequality of 0.69, while its income inequality is only 0.37. Improving income inequality doesn't always improve wealth inequality because many of the richest people don't generate their fortunes through work. Their wealth comes from the accumulation of value from their assets. Under certain conditions, improving income and equality can worsen wealth inequality because as people with lower incomes earn more money, they will spend more on businesses or even invest in them. In any case, this will increase the value of those companies, benefiting the people who already own them. In other words, rich people, if you want to see this counterintuitive process of income improvement and equality resulting in worse wealth inequality, just look at the global economy between 2022 and 2022. Generous stimulus measures made with the best intentions to help struggling households through an unprecedented economic shock leveled the playing field of income a bit. However, it made people who were already very rich even richer because the money flowed into the companies they already owned, either through investments or purchases of products. How many people do you know who bought Tesla stocks or a Tesla car? However, in the long term, increased income inequality should result in a more equitable distribution of wealth. So, which country is the most egalitarian according to wealth inequality metrics? Again, it's a simple question to answer by consulting the list of countries based on wealth inequality coefficient figures. The answer is Slovakia, Belgium, Myanmar, or East Timor, which are a bit more challenging to explain. Although the Gini coefficient can be used to measure wealth inequality, there are some reasons why the results may not be as comparable from country to country as income inequality figures. To begin with, the data is not as easy to collect. Almost all major world economies record incomes in one form or another, and if incomes are recorded, they need to be tracked. Therefore, figuring out how much people earn is as easy as using tax agency databases. Few countries have wealth taxes, which makes most governments not bother tracking them. The list we use in this video is composed of data from 4 different sources with almost identical data collection methodologies and techniques. It's difficult to agree on the value of a house or a car at a given time, but these assets still represent a significant part of the total wealth of a significant number of people. Wealth can also be negative as people incur debts. But most economists agree that even if someone has a negative net worth of $50,000 due to having $10,000 in cash and $60,000 in student loans, they may be in the bottom 1% of the population by net worth, but they are likely in a better situation than someone with $5 in their pocket. The person with $5 may be $50,000 richer, but their income potential and quality of life will be much lower. Countries like Myanmar and East Timor reach their level of wealth inequality in part because it's difficult for people in those countries to get into debt since there are no established financial institutions to serve them. Wealth inequality can also be complicated by extremely rich individuals who can skew the results of entire countries. If in a group there is 1 billionaire and 999 poor people, the average person in that group is a millionaire. Additionally, a few very rich people can distort the income distribution curve enough to make an egalitarian economy look like an oligopoly. According to the best statistics on the Gini coefficient, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Denmark have a higher level of wealth inequality than Saudi Arabia and South Africa. Any reasonable person would prefer to be a working-class person in Sweden than in South Africa. This also highlights another problem with wealth inequality. It's not a problem unless it's making people poorer. As the world has become richer, it has also become more unequal because the capacity for extreme wealth generation has grown with it. I'd rather live in an economy where the average person is worth $100,000, but there are a few billionaires than one where everyone is worth $10,000 equally. It may seem like an easy argument that the first economy has more wealth overall, but the development of industry and innovation in the world was largely driven by the profit motive. This means that wealth inequality is very difficult to measure for economists, and that makes it very difficult to work with. The popular solution of limiting the wealth of the rich does not improve the average person's quality of life unless their wealth has been actively obtained by robbing people through corruption. In reality, it can harm the overall wealth of an economy because it eliminates the incentive for already wealthy individuals to reinvest their capital in risky businesses when there is no potential. But I didn't promise you a list of challenges that economists face when working on inequality and the economy. I promised you the most egalitarian country in the world, and it's probably Australia. This is strange because Australia does well in all income Gini fibers, but not so much compared to Eastern European or Scandinavian countries. It's also midway in terms of wealth and equality figures, but it wins in the most important inequality metric, which is, if you had to be a working class person in any country, where would you want to be? It might be biased, but I would say you probably want to be in Australia. For starters, the average Australian is very wealthy and trades with Switzerland to make the town the richest in the world. So that helps. The country has a lot of rich people. 11.2% of the population is millionaires. But even the average Australian does very well compared to the rest of the world. The average Australian, meaning half the population is richer than them and the other half poorer, has a net worth of $238,000. The proportion of wealth owned by the bottom 80% of the country is 27%, which is higher than the United States with only 15%. Obviously, Australia has many advantages. It's an attractive place to invest, has a large mining industry, and a relatively small population, which we've seen before helps in these kinds of things. But it also has policies that protect citizens without stifling entrepreneurship. Remember when I told you there were ways that governments could control inequality? Taxation, social welfare, and one more: policies around the minimum wage. Congratulations to anyone who guessed it. Australia has the highest minimum wage rate of any country in the world. Additionally, employers are required to make mandatory payments to their employees' retirement funds regardless of their working arrangements. These savings are compulsory for retirement and are part of the reason why the average Australian is the way they are. Australians can't access this money until they're 60 years old, and it turns out they are required to save 10% of your salary for life. It accumulates very quickly, especially on global leader salaries. This, combined with a very low unemployment rate, means the average worker can build a very comfortable life in some of the world's most habitable areas. Of course, there are still issues, with housing affordability being the main one, especially in large cities. But the fact that the population is wealthy and concentrated in a few small areas of a vast country is also a plus. If you disagree with me, that's great because it shows how difficult the debate on inequality can be, and we can't even agree on which country is achieving inequality. There's a compelling argument that at least a dozen countries could be the most egalitarian. I don't want to get too philosophical here, but economics is a social science, and that often means good economists have to look beyond statistical numbers when trying to craft optimal outcomes. It's pointless to make an economy the most egalitarian if everyone is equally miserable. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave a comment. Also, please consider liking and subscribing. I would really appreciate it. Thanks.